Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Every July, we celebrate things Bahamian. Nowadays, it's all about the latest Bahamian fashion trends, social media graphics, or a deluge of WhatsApp messages reminding everyone just how proud we are to be Bahamian. 46 years and going strong. The Bahamas is a complex nation, from its archipelagic makeup to its unique economic structure to the sarcastic wit of the people. But have we made progress in the areas that matter? Economically, we're well off. Better than many, but we lag behind in some critical areas that make us still third world and a developing nation in many respects. Tonight on The Record, we look at 46 years after independence. Are we moving forward, upward, onward together, as the coat of arms says, or are we going nowhere fast? It's all on The Record tonight. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so these about the low value cost in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
On The Record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand Lucayan is a hot subject in the news. We're going to Just yesterday, thousands of Bahamians around the world celebrated the 46th anniversary of independence. The celebrations at Clifford Park were well received with much favorable feedback over the annual cultural display. The Jalcanoe parade that followed drew large crowds as well. And well into the day, the celebrations continued from Government House to Coconut Grove. For one day, we all agreed we were proud to be Bahamian. But sunrise this morning brought some familiar realities: crime, unemployment, immigration issues, social decay, and a growing impatience and intolerance with our politicians and political system. Our topic tonight: 46 years, forward, upward, onward together, or going nowhere fast. My guest tonight, I had the privilege of having Robin Lyons. She's a former PLP senator and attorney. Now, Robin, I had hoped to have a panel. But it seems you were the only one who could have gotten up after independence and made it this morning.
Someone was celebrating too hard.
Yeah, but I thank you for coming.
We missed them, but I'm glad to see you.
Listen, I have no doubt that we're going to have a great discussion tonight. You know, sometimes it happens that way, but you know, as the old adage goes, the show must go on.
It must.
Let's start out this way. First of all, happy.
If I can say happy independence to everybody that's watching. It's a privilege to be here, and 46 years is not a long time, but it's still significant for us. We're growing every day. I think we've done great things and greater things to come. So I want to say happy independence to everyone that's watching. Happy independence in my country.
You know, it's a wonderful time.
It is.
I'm 47, so I'm always a year ahead. I'm always a year ahead of the country, and I always use myself and my own life and compare it to the country and where we are in the developing stage. And you know, it's interesting because the late Archdeacon William Thompson used to say, you know, you get sense at 40. So hopefully the Bahamas begin, we catching sense now as a nation. But, you know, first of all, do we understand, do we appreciate what it means to be Bahamian?
I think that may be a generational question. And why I say that is because I think with each generation, the answer to that question may differ. I think our older generation have a better understanding. They can articulate better, they can conceptualize it better because they have not had the extent of the European and the American influence that my generation and the generations after me have had. But I think this sense of pride of what it means to be Bahamian, this sense of accomplishment and achievement, this kind of gratitude towards our freedoms, I think my generation and sometimes the generation after me, because it's always been this way for us. We weren't a part of the struggle that brought us here.
Sure.
We were born into these privileges, and it's hard to kind of relate to it the same way someone who was on the front line, someone who understood what it meant for a Bahamian to not be able to go certain places in the Bahamas, to have restrictions, to have isolated areas that you just weren't allowed because of the color of your skin, and other issues that they faced in the 50s and the 40s and the years prior to that. My generation, though, I was born into that privilege of freedom, accessibility. And so whilst I have an appreciation for it because I've learned, I've read the stories, I've listened to the accounts, and I've kind of been able to imagine these things in my mind, I think we haven't told our children enough. We haven't developed that sense of appreciation in them sufficiently. What it means to be Bahamian is not just what it means in our present, it's also what we've been through in our past.
It's interesting because, you know, you would hear Grammy or you know, great-grandma Grammy or talk about what it was like to have that British passport,
Yeah.
what it was like when we flew the Union Jack or when we sang God Save the Queen. And that sense of pride that came with the transition into our own existed in that generation. But,
Yeah.
you know, even for me, you know, I was one when all of this happened, and so all my memory is in an independent Bahamas.
Yeah.
But I think for my generation, there's still that connection because we heard more about it.
You were there. It's almost like you were there.
Yeah.
When it was happening. So even though you don't have a personal account or experience, because it was so fresh,
Yes.
everybody was talking about it. Because it was so fresh, everybody was relating to it, and you kind of grew up in that reality. You see what I mean?
Are we still, though, still trying to find our identity in some ways now, 46 years later?
Sometimes I think so, because it seems as though it's changing. The display of it is changing. The culture of our people seems to be changing. You know, we used to be a people who are prized for the level of fellowship and humanity and this kind of open door policy that you still find on some of the family islands, that if you didn't have something and a neighbor had something, you had it. And this sense of community that existed where if, you know, my grandmother, those used to tell me stories that if you did something wrong, your mother or father wasn't coming to the school to cuss nobody out or row no teacher. You would get beaten from the teacher, from the neighbor, from the pastor.
It was a
because
sense of
all
shame.
All of
Yeah.
them had this sense of accountability and responsibility for you and what it is that you do. And now all of a sudden we're a culture where we're so desensitized. You can pick up your phone and see people text messaging you or WhatsApping you pictures of dead bodies, perhaps even before the families have learned that their loved ones have succumbed to that fate. And so culturally, we seem to be changing as a people and what we're known for, our level of love and compassion for one another, and I don't think that's a good thing.
But on the other side, I see something very interesting happening as well. I see, particularly in a younger generation, you see this pride in the 242.
Yeah,
Particularly
yeah.
around, you know, Independence Time. It's like there's this rush now to display who we are
Yeah.
and what we're about. And I get your point. I complain about it every day. I think that we have, you know, we're not as civil as we used to be towards each other. But I go back to the incident involving Shawnee Miller's gold medal performance at the Olympics when she won, and when the Americans and others questioned that. the veracity of the attacks
They
of
call it the Bahamian
Bahamians.
Beehive, that's right.
Yes,
Don't-
we
don't.
brought new words into social media and
Yeah,
into that,
yeah.
and that we came together to protect our own, and I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing, though. It's not all lost.
Yeah.
And although there's this level of desensitization, we're also very territorial, though. That wasn't a Bahamian attacking Shawnee. That was an outsider attacking
Yes.
her. Don't do that. Now, we can row and fight and carry
row
on
in
bad
the
in our
house.
own space.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because we all represent the soil. But an outsider, you know, I mean, you know the way we feel about foreigners to a certain degree. I mean, so you know, don't mess with our people.
What I also find interesting too, I see, you know, a lot of workplaces would have done, they sort of do Bahamian displays and competitions, and of course you see these things on social media.
Yeah.
I remember, I didn't always see that. You know,
Yeah.
in the early days of, I'm not that old, in the early days of our independence, we were proud, but we did not always, I think, promote things Bahamian across the board, because it seemed as if, you know, they existed and they were there, so there was no need to promote.
Yeah.
But you see, you know, like I see people with a tin tub and the things like that.
The washboard.
The washboard that you
Yeah.
never see anymore.
Yeah.
But we still somehow hold on to those things and want to remind ourselves that they exist.
Yeah, I think it's important because where are you going to see those things anywhere else?
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to preserve it. I saw some photos. There was this particular business establishment. I think they had a competition about who could, I guess, display Bahamian
The most,
culture
yeah.
better. So
Yeah,
they
there
had
were
these
several
sections.
places, several
They had
jobs,
Bay
several
Street,
places that
and
did
so
that.
you saw they call it Saturday morning. So you saw the clothes hanging on the line. You saw the washboard. You saw the tin tub. You know, Saturday in Bahamian culture is all about getting the house clean.
Yes.
Early Saturday morning, you getting that house clean. You may have some sauce, some stew, some grits, some Johnny cake, but it's cleaning time, right? And then they had Bay Street, they had the peanut cake, the Benny cake, the coconut tarts, they had the bush teas, and all of these things, and it was just such a refreshing reminder that, you know what, this is a part of me, this is my culture, I can't go anywhere else in the world and have a conversation with some of my elders and they say, we know the bush for that, we know the medicine for that, go get some cotton leaf tea for this cold, or you need some Cersei, and it's just a refreshing reality for us, and that's something that we ought to preserve for generations to come.
What I like too is that social media helps us to see
Yeah.
what others are doing, particularly in places around the world. You see Bahamians elsewhere. I had friends in Atlanta,
Yeah.
in the UK, in New York, who celebrated independence on their jobs or in their homes, in other places in the world. So they
Bahamian
took
pride
that
is very,
Bahamian pride.
very, very, very strong. And we also recognize too and appreciate that we come from somewhere that people save up sometimes their entire lives to
come.
get to.
Right.
We live in paradise. We've experienced and have experiences of some of the most beautiful places in the world, not just one place, places.
One of my favorite social media posts is I live where you vacation.
Yeah,
What are
yeah,
some of the
yeah.
things, though, that you think we have done well as a country?
Well, I think one of the things we've done well is try to push the need for education. We still have a ways to go in terms of how that manifests, whether or not our children are grasping what could be done differently in our schools, et cetera, et cetera. But the need for education, though, is our sense of awareness of it, like knowledge is our emancipation. Post-independence, after the general elections of 1967, you saw this emphasis on educating our children. And whilst we have much work to do so that the quality of that education, the level that children are actually grasping what is being taught in the schools, how it's being taught, et cetera, is another conversation. But you definitely see this sense of awareness. Our children need to learn. They need to be taught. We need to be emancipated intellectually so that we then can take advantage of the opportunities that we have in this country. I think that's one of the things that I'm very proud of, how we've done that. I'm also very proud of how we've been able to, as a small island nation, to have Bahamians compete on world-class stages and just stand out. Our representation may be small, but the quality of it, I mean, going up against world-renowned persons in whatever field, you put a Bahamian, you find them, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's sports, you know, whether it's design and all of these various things, you find these Bahamians just going in and dominating these areas. And it's a reminder of the kind of natural ability and talent we have as a people.
Okay, so on the flip side now, of that same point, what are some of the greater deficiencies? What have we not done well in the 46 years?
I'd say economic emancipation. The Commonwealth is not common as it ought to be. And I think that Bahamians are still too restricted in being able to get a piece of this pie. We have so many Bahamians that are gifted, that are talented, that are innovative, have a lot of ingenuity in things that they want to do. They just don't have the opportunity. And I think we haven't done sufficient in making it easy for those Bahamians to thrive. We have about 2 million acres of crown land that's available around the Bahamas. We don't even have a populace of 500,000 people. You can give every single Bahamian an acre of crown land and still have over 1.5 million to spare.
Yes.
But think about it though. What would you do with an acre of land at your disposal to develop, to do whatever? You see what I'm saying? That's just one example. When we think about investments, when we think about how our policies have been crafted and created to attract foreign direct investment, and the level of concessions, tax breaks, accessibility to crown land, et cetera, the amount of money the government is willing to put in infrastructure, even in marketing, what they give to some of these hotels in reimbursements for marketing and promotion, et cetera. Where is the equivalent for our own people? When we come to the table, is there a red carpet laid out for me? You know, the Hotel Encouragement Act is a discouragement for the average Bahamian, and that can't be. It should not be. There should be no laws in this country that are at the disadvantage of any Bahamian. That's where we failed ourselves as a people, and that's where we need to do the most work.
Good point. We are at the point of our first break in the show. Stay with us. We're going to be right back right after this.
Where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so these about the low value of cost in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
More on the record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand Lukine is a hot subject in the news. We're going to...
This portion of On the Record is brought to you by Generali Insurance Company Limited, your employee benefit specialist.
And welcome back. The 1967 election was fought on a message of anti-corruption. The PLP galvanized a majority victory on a message that the ruling United Bahamian Party, UBP, did not have the interests of the majority Bahamian people at heart. By the time 1992 rolled around, the PLP was sent into opposition by the Free National Movement with a similar campaign message. History repeated itself in 2017 when the PLP suffered the worst defeat in election history, with a sitting Prime Minister losing his seat. There has been no shortage of political drama in an independent Bahamas, inclusive of several commissions of inquiry. Our topic tonight, 46 years, forward, upward, onward together, or going nowhere fast. My guest, happy to have former senator, and attorney Robin Lyons. Robin,
Thank you so much to be here.
has politics defined who we are? Obviously, politics would have led to majority rule. It in fact led to, I mean, an election even led to independence. It was either, you know, the election prior was either you're voting yes for independence and for the PLP or no. But beyond that, has it defined who we are as a people?
I think it has a stronger influence on it than it should. Perhaps not the complete definition, but there is an extremely strong impact. And that's because of the culture of dependence on government. I think sometimes we don't really realize what government is for.
Do you think that was intentional? To make the people dependent upon us, and so that they make them dependent on us, so they are beholding to us, so they will continue.
I think it was politically expedient to kind of develop that sense of dependency on government for politicians for a very, very long time. And I think it's starting to backfire because those expectations aren't realizable.
The PLP, I'm going to go to the 67 election, blamed said that the UBP would come in, and bring 5 pounds of flour and send all kinds of things to the islands and, to get people to vote for them. They came in, we want to change how government treats people. We're here for you. We, the majority, are going to look after our people. But here we are now, 46 years later, and as you said, people are still solely dependent on government for a job. If you want your road paved, if you want your tree cut down, if a family member dies, you need help, you seek out your MP. Have we really changed that? Have we changed that structure that we, Black Bahamians, accuse the UBP of?
Well, I think that we've moved from it to a certain degree, but I think also the electorate, though, has not demanded sufficiently this kind of separation from those things, because if you've worked in any campaign, if you've gone door to door, if you've kind of been a part of the conversations that lead up to an election, the requests that people make, the things that they want, the things that they suggest they need from this person that is seeking to represent them in the halls of Parliament, lets you know where their mindset is. And so, there's this opening for a vote to be purchased, and very few times you can have a conversation with someone in the campaign about anything other than them and their household. So the conversation hasn't advanced to the country, what we need as a people, what we need as a nation. It's still very centered on the individual. And I think that the politicians that have tried to push past that have been the ones that have gotten the most resistance. And so there's still an opening for that. But I think, as far as my experience has shown me, the Progressive Liberal Party has tried to, develop, to elevate the mindset of the electorate, to elevate the election process in its entirety. But people have to want to go there as well. Our electorate has to want to go there. Our populace has to want to go there.
Do we know what we want? And that's going to lead me to my next question, because I'm going to ask, my next question is, how do Bahamians see their politicians today? Because, we say we want better.
Yeah.
We say we want more out of the politician, but the day after the election, we're asking for the same thing.
Yeah.
We're right back to the where my ham and turkey, and I want my $100 in my heaven forbid, in my T-shirt, or we ask these things, but then we demand better.
I think
go ahead. Sorry.
If I'm honest with you, I think people want opportunity from their politicians. I think people want, unfortunately though, the vast majority of us want the maximum for the minimum. We just want someone to do for us, and we're less vocal, and our advocacy diminishes when someone is doing for us. It doesn't really matter what's not being done for others. And so what my MP is supposed to do is what I need my MP to do. I think we need more community-minded people more people that are advocating on behalf of the greater amount of people that are being affected. And I know that you may need this in your household, but how many other households need other things? And so when we have a conversation and we talk about the quality of representation that a member of parliament has brought to a particular constituency, if I ask you that, that can't be individualized to you. Well, I never see him. He ain't never do nothing for me. What has he done for the constituency? How has he represented in parliament? What was his policy position
yeah.
on various legislation that were brought? Were you watching? Were you holding him or her to account? Did you even take advantage of the opportunities to go there and say, this is what I understand to be the legislation in discussion. This is my position on it.
Interestingly, you say that, and the pushback would be, well, you know, the Westminster system doesn't allow, but this time around, in this particular, you know, in this government setting, we would have seen a break from the norm in that you had four sitting MPs who would have voted against a particular measure within the budget to increase value-added tax.
Yeah.
That was unprecedented. And those individuals stood up in Parliament and said, my constituents have told me no.
Yes, yes.
And there was a lot of criticism, or there was some criticism within members of the party for that. But I saw that as a turning point and a watershed moment for us in some ways, because I think for the first time, you have now MPs who are listening to a constituents or a constituency and saying, wait a minute. And I think they have voted, some of them have voted against a few other measures, but for whatever reason, you now have this break with the norm that we never would have seen, never would happen in a pending administration, in Ingram, or even in a Christie administration, that you would have had people get up and say, no, I am voting against what my party is intending to move through Parliament.
Well, I think you may have had it if the impact of the legislation was going to be as extreme as that particular amendment has been to the average Bahamian. I think people have to be pushed there. And I think if you had seen this kind of callousness and disregard for what people are saying, you would have seen it before. But the action of this administration in the increase of value-added tax was unprecedented to me, because there was no consultation, because the private sector and persons within the financial services sector and elsewhere were saying, this is not good. Let's not do this.
Members of the party, or they didn't even know it was happening?
You know, and so, right, the backbenchers said, when you found out about it, we found out about it. So the circumstances were unprecedented, to say the least. And it was just a bad move for the country, bad move for the economy. And so that was not anything that wasn't being vocalized in every constituency. It was just that 4 of those members were brave enough to say what was being said.
Do you think it's going to, do you think we'll see more of it in the future? Do you think now people feel that, hey, if that can happen in that constituency, or I can, those MPs can be pushed to vote for what I want? Do you think more people are now going to approach their MPs with something similar to say yes or no in favor or against a government measure?
I hope so. I hope so. I hope that the next group of members of parliament that come into the Honorable House are a group of men and women who do truly represent. Because when you stand, every member of parliament does it. I stand on behalf of the good people of. I represent the good people of. Thank you for putting me here. And more often than not, what comes out of their mouth after have nothing to do with the sentiments of those good people. And that has to change.
Who is today's politician? How did you define today's politician? And it's changed significantly from you know, when we came to the '67 election, and even, you know, the election that brought us prior to independence. But who is, at one time the politician was the attorney or the doctor or the upstanding, well-to-do man or woman.
Person of high morale in society, someone that was revered, very well respected.
So, who now is today's politician?
That's an interesting question. It depends. It depends on whether we're asking today's politicians should be or who they aspire to be. I don't know. The thing I guess I'm trying to get at is, it depends, to be honest with you, with the constituency that person is vying for. I've seen, because there's no clear standard anymore. You know what you want out of a politician, and so most persons that offer themselves possess certain things. They're educated people. They ought to be, articulate. They have a certain level of rapport with people. They're able to, converse and have that sense of meaningful conversation and dialogue, and you can almost feel or get a sense that, hey, this person is relatable. That was the politician of yesteryear. I'm not so sure who today's politician is anymore, because if you look in Parliament, what I could define across the board, I don't really see. And so you have what we call political waves. You have party waves where people are just voting against a sitting government. And so the incoming administration, those individuals are not really being assessed. They're not really being scrutinized to a particular degree. You just know that this is not what you want. This is the option that's available. Okay, you come in. And so when you really look individually at cabinet, at persons holding posts, right now, to be honest with you, can you really truly say, you know what, that person is there because of this qualification, because of that level of expertise, that's a good fit for that particular position, they know what it is that they're doing, this is what they were doing prior to Parliament, this is the kind of experience that they bring to this particular post, etc., etc. Not so much.
Which leads, of course, into this to the next line of questioning. Throughout our political cycles, there is always accusations, and there has been overwhelming evidence of corruption within governments, series of governments, people who have served in government, people who have served in Parliament. How has this been allowed, and why has this been allowed to continue and even to flourish sometimes? And I say it across the board.
Yeah, what I always tell people is that there are mechanisms to deal with corruption. There are mechanisms in our political policies, there are mechanisms in our civil laws, there are mechanisms in our criminal laws. And accusations, I don't really move a lot on accusations. I move on evidence and I move on conclusions. And the reality of it is that there has been a lot of talk about corruption, but when you strip it all the way down, there are only a handful of individuals who've been allowed to blatantly abuse their public office for the direct or indirect benefit of themselves or persons close to them. And those persons have not been brought to account. There's only one instance on record that I can remember, and I stand to be corrected, where an individual was actually brought before the courts, tried, found guilty of corruption, and that was a former F&M administrator. I think it was the BEC scandal, I think. Other than that, you have these new cases. But you see what's been happening in those cases. I know there are gag orders, etc., certain things that you can't talk about. But you see the level of influence that has been going on to get these cases to sway a certain way, from the police to witnesses to redacting of evidence and records to coercing to changing the record, etc., etc., etc. I think that with all of this going on, though, with all of this going on, the question that people are asking themselves is anybody in government honest? Do we still have those people whose mindset is really servant leaders?
But when you consider, Robin, that we're 46 years as a country, and we've had numerous commissions of inquiry.
Yes.
Involving government officials.
Yes.
Who have been called to give an account. no one has been prosecuted out of those, nothing significant other than some embarrassing situations. But it brought to light some scurrilous activities and behavior.
That's true, yeah.
that in some instances is still allowed to continue in government. And so we see these public displays. People are brought publicly, are asked to give an account. Nothing happens. And and I take your point. You stand on the laws of an attorney. It has to be information, obviously. That is credible, that you can move forward on.
Because because we too often see the way, accusations fizzle out, and then as you peel
So
back
the
the layers,
problem then
those
is it just that
accusations are
so then the
retreated.
problem is that we aren't moving. Is it then that they just remain accusations and they sort of fall to the wayside and we move forward? Are we not doing enough now to ask people to account for the public? And it's not, don't get me wrong now, it's not just politicians, it's people within the public service,
across
some
the
of
board.
which who have been brought before the courts and prosecuted. People in the post office and other places, you hear all these things that money's missing from road traffic and all these other places, and all these audits, and people can't give an account of money that you and I our money.
Yeah.
And nothing happens.
Well, see, this is what I believe. I'm a firm believer in this. If there's wrongdoing, deal with it. Make an example of the wrongdoer. Well, and you're right about that. And we ought to, but we have to be more intentional, though. Like I said, and I continue to say this, I have watched and I've witnessed and I've seen what happens as a result of public demand. It completely changes when Bahamians get vocal and they get serious about certain things. They will not be ignored. They cannot be ignored. You want a more accountable government? Demand it. Demand it. And be serious about your demands for it. Be relentless about your demands for it. And push people to better. Because when you see the next slate of candidates that offer themselves to say, we have come to serve you, do some cross-checks, do your homework, do some assessments, ask them the hard questions. Are these people fit for governance? And that is it. It is about public demand. I am one of those people who believe that no matter what side of the political divide you sit on, wrong is always going to be wrong. Right is always going to be right. The problems that we face is sometimes where we have to cloak or shield wrongdoing because it so happens that our affiliation with this person requires us to do so. I'm not of that school of thought. I'm not of that school of thought. We have to demand better. We have to want better on every single level. Just as simple as coming to do business at a government agency. You walk with $20, it could be the difference between being there for 20 minutes or for half of a day. And that in and of itself is a certain level of corruption that should not be. It's not, you hear the old mantra, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And you can pick up the phone and make calls and get all the way to where it is that you want to be. That is the way the system works. We're either going to be accepting of that or we're going to reject it. But we can't do it, piecemeal.
In pockets.
Just because it negatively impacts me today, then I have a problem with it. But when it is in my favor, everything is okay. No, we have to demand better on every level, across the board.
That's the Bahamian way. We're in the midst of our discussion. If you are enjoying it, please stay tuned. On the Record continues right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and the balanced, true, and open debate you've been looking for. Welcome back to On the Record. One of the first acts of the PLP government in an independent Bahamas was to provide free and better education for Bahamians 46 years later. We have a University of the Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute. We have access to education across the country, and yet we struggle to get past the national average of D. On the Record tonight, year 46, forward, upward, onward together, or are we going nowhere fast? My guest, former Senator and attorney Robin Lyons. Robin.
Hi.
Everybody gets free education. As you talked about it as one of the things that we have done right in an independent Bahamas.
The access, yeah.
Yet we don't seem to be making the grade. And I'm not just talking about the grade on paper. I talk about it on the show all the time. You can tell that we are lacking often in just basic fundamental education by the quality of people who turn up for jobs, the interactions, the inability to express oneself. You see it even in crime. You know, you have a lot of young men, unfortunately, who turn to a life of crime because they cannot find a job, they cannot take care of themselves, their families. And why is that? That if you trace that back, a lot of that comes back to a lack of education. Yet every September, we all crisp, clean, shoe polish, haircut, hair braid, ribbon.
Well, they say tags on everything.
Tags on everything. And we all walk into the school doors, you know, walk into these classrooms, arms open. What happened?
It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma, and I think that there's no one cause. There's no one issue. I think it's a collection of a number of things that we're challenged with. One of the things that we're not challenged with, though, is throwing money at the problem. Over the course of these 46 years, there have been hundreds of millions of dollars invested in educating our children, and something's happening. We need to regroup. You see, the thing about it is that we're in a school system and dealing with a curriculum and a style of learning that is blanket. And every children in a classroom are covered with that blanket. But not every child learns the same way. Not every child gravitates toward information the same way. You have a child, you give them a book, they will read it all day, and the pages come to life. They will remember everything that was written. You have a child that you give them a book, they just can't focus, they can't read it. Have a conversation with them. Let them listen. Let them hear what it is, and they can articulate just as well what they've heard as the reader can what he or she has read. And so we need to stop, first and foremost, this blanket approach to education and give our children what is palatable to them in terms of their intellectual ability, whether it's visual, whether it's that kind of auditory learning, whether they're better with their hands, and then stop classing the intelligence of an individual with their grasp for, we call it the 3 R's, even though the words don't begin with R.
That's the first problem.
Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Because you have students that are so good with their hands and the way they think and the way they can break things down and build it back up again. You have students that think like mathematicians, but they're not taught that way. They're not, the information isn't being introduced to them in the way that their brain is able to access it, to break it down, and to produce better results. So that's the first thing we need to do. Put our children in the categories that they adapt to learning. The second thing is what we consider to be the average of or assessment of how well our children are doing are these end-of-year exams. You have the GLAT, you have the BJC, you have the BGCSE. The challenge, though, and predominantly with the BGCSE, is that you have grades that go from A to G and then U, an 8-point grade system in the BGCSE. But you also have core subjects in the BGCSE, where the highest grade you can get is a C. But the accumulative average is adding those to 8-point system with the 5-point system, because you can't get an A or a B. Or the 6-point system rather. So when you merge those two and you calculate it, those persons taking the core subjects are bringing the average down of the person who is taking the 8-point subjects where they can get an A or they can get a B. So that's the first problem.
So then let's reassess
Average the
how.
core, average the 8-point system.
It seems like a simple fix, eh?
so that you can gauge better how well the students who are taking the core exams are doing and what's the average grade there, versus how well the children who are taking the 8-point grade system and what's the average there.
Is enough focus though being placed on the kids by parents? And I guess let me ask that better in a better way. We send the children to school and we expect the school, the teacher, the classroom to be the panacea for all things.
Yeah.
And as parents, we abdicate our responsibility
Well, that's a huge part of the problem. That is a huge part of the problem. I'd say that is perhaps one of the larger parts of the problem, because you will spend more time at home with your parent or guardian than you would with your teachers and the faculty that are teaching you. To be honest with you, today's students have more breaks than I remember ever having. Before school starts, you're on a break, on a midterm break, and you've only been to school for 2 weeks, you know? And so, I mean, there are parents who simply don't have any responsibility and accountability. I know that there are schools that say that students will not be allowed to come back to classes until someone comes and reviews this report card and has a conversation with their teachers, their guidance counselors, and kind of get to the bottom of how well that child is doing, how not so well. And even with that rule being put in place, they still struggle for somebody to come and sit and talk about Johnny's progress, Sarah's progress, etc. So that lack of parental responsibility is a very big problem. I run a nonprofit organization and we deal with students, we deal with children. The reality of it is, in my experience, and I'm no teacher, the students that have support, and it doesn't even matter the measure of support, they just do better.
Yeah.
They just do better.
Have we, I'm going to sort of just spring forward a bit. You know, we have traditionally, our people have gone into areas out of school, into tourism, financial services, these of course being key economic pillars in our economy. It would appear that we haven't diversified enough, and also in many instances it would appear that these have become the easy things to do. You finish school, you get a job in a hotel, you work in a bank, you work in an offshore bank, you live a good life.
Yeah.
Has that been to our detriment in some instances?
Well, only to the degree where that is seen as it. If it is seen as a stepping stone to something else, then no. But where that is the end of it has been a kind of incapacitation for our growth, if you will, because we are now developing a culture of employees. Mm-hmm. You are supposed to just get a job, not create jobs for others. And this promotion of entrepreneurship, we need to be serious about it, because opportunities are about access. I can do nothing with an idea without access to capital and resources. When you're serious about entrepreneurship for our young people, then make that accessible to them.
And there's no shortage of ideas, you know.
Yeah,
especially young people today. You talk to them and they are bursting with ideas.
Access.
An opportunity, as you said.
Policy has to follow access, because policy is just a shell. So if you say this is what we want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then what has to follow is how do you make that accessible to the average person. Another thing that we struggle with as well, though, is that there is too much red tape for Bahamians to be able to do what it is that they need to do. There's too many restrictions, and those restrictions need to be removed, where you see people actually have realizable ideas. Just move the restrictions. Stop making it so difficult for people to thrive.
It's discouraging.
Yeah.
It really is discouraging.
Nobody wants to deal with that.
We, like so many other countries, and I just want to say that these things, of course, are not unique to the Bahamas. I mean, any other country you go and we can have the same discussion. But how is the brain drain affecting our country, and it's always been there. People have always gone off and determined that they are not going to come back for whatever reason. But what kind of effect has that had on us in being able to really bring qualified Bahamians into some key positions and key industries that can really help to move us forward?
Well, it's affected us in that we haven't been able to create sufficient industries. You know, Bahamians are all over the world creating. They're all over the world expanding.
And creating for other people.
And creating for other people. And that's what we're lacking here. The thing about it is that you have three, I would say, major categories of employers: the government, the hotel industry, and financial services. So outside of those three main areas, everybody's battling. And even within those sectors, you're battling. For instance, look at what's going on in financial services. And this is mainly where young persons find the best access to employment and good paying jobs. But
And a better lifestyle.
our financial services sector is on the attack. What are we doing about that? So the next step is work in a hotel. The minimum wage in a hotel is still satisfactory for a lot of people, and then you have areas for advancement and moving up, and then it's what everybody else wants: a job working for government, working for civil service. Where are the industries? Where are the technological industries that are talking about the creation of apps and other technological advances that the world is moving in towards? Where are the industries that create jobs? It's not because we don't have Bahamians that are training in these various capacities, but they're going off to other countries and developing those countries. We have to be able to say we have opened the door in these industries for Bahamians to come in and own them. Ownership of those industries, not government micromanagement. Just ownership, and being able to say everything that you need is being provided to you, so that you then can move from employee to employer. We're educating you differently. I mean, think about it. When you call a bank, someone in Trinidad is answering the phone.
And not just the bank, and other services as well.
When you make a deposit, they're charging you for it. Why? Because they want to discourage you from physically coming and doing business. They want to push you to doing business electronically and online. Where is the sector in our society, in our country, that is focused on that type of business? Where is that industry? And how are we preparing our students to enter into that industry so that we can thrive? Why don't we have a call center in the Bahamas for other persons and businesses and corporations to use us? We're losing jobs and we're not creating sufficient opportunities for ourselves.
Fantastic point. You're watching On the Record. Our final segment is right after this break. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Listen, what is more dangerous than
Gentlemen, we've got to move
is the
very quickly.
illusion
Let's
of
wrap up.
integrity.
It's all On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Bahamas today is a kaleidoscope of races, nationalities, cultures, and religions. We find ourselves sharing our beloved Bahamaland with our Caribbean neighbors, those to the north, former European colonizers, and even the great technologists of the Far East. They come as immigrants, workers, investors, spouses, and offspring. It's a very different reality in the Bahamas today. Year 46, forward, upward, onward together, or going nowhere fast. My guest, Robin Lyons. Robin, I've got to ask, are we inclusive enough, not inclusive enough, or does it depend on what color you are?
Why would I?
Because, you know, some people get a pass depending on how you speak, where you come from.
That's a heavy loaded question. The honesty that, you know, should be applied to it, though, is that it is dependent. It is dependent.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. We have selective xenophobia. We do, and that's the truth. If we want to be honest with ourselves, and we see it manifest in immigration conversation. What are we most upset and irate about? Who are
Haitians
we most
and Jamaicans.
upset and irate about? And I think sometimes the derogatory commentary in how we talk,
Color of skin.
it kind of shows us why we feel the way we feel. And to be honest with you, though, we have other threats. If you're talking about the economy, if you're talking about commerce, then you need to look at who's doing business in this country.
Which is a
whose
great threat.
businesses
Yes.
are thriving. You need to look at who is acquiring properties in this country, where those properties are being acquired. So if we really want to be honest about the conversation, our Haitian brothers and sisters and our Jamaican brothers and sisters are not really a threat in that respect. So we have to get you know, really honest about why we feel the way we feel about certain peoples and nationalities, if you will, because there are threats that do exist to our way of life. I don't think those threats, though, should be rest at the feet of Haitian nationals and Jamaicans that are coming here. That's not to say that we have an open door policy and it's a free-for-all. That is, though, to say let's be fair with the conversation and line everybody up and have an equal kind of approach to everyone, because the volume of Jamaicans and Haitians that come to our shores are because of what's going on in their country. They're just looking for a better way of life. That's a different mentality to people who are literally coming here, taking advantage of our resources, taking advantage of access to opportunities, and trying to take over industries in this country. We have to look at that, and we don't seem to be threatened by that.
Does the Christian church, notice I use Christian church, still have too much authority in our decision, too much authority in country and too much influence in decision making?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the influence of the church is a good thing, because the church represents the moral compass and the conscience of our country. I think what's happening, though, is that the church's voice is so divided. And so you have a multiplicity of expressions. You don't really know what the church represents.
Notice I didn't say religion now.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't know what. Well, I mean, I call it all the church.
Right, because
But you don't know. You don't really
ahead.
know what it represents sometimes, because, you know, depending on who's in power, the church is persuaded to advocate differently. You know, depending on what the topic is, the church is persuaded to advocate differently. And so the church may be vocal about one sector of immorality and mum on the other, and I'm not sure that has been sufficient to garner respect for the voice of the church.
Okay, final question. Where do you see the Bahamas at 50? And that's close.
Well, I see us under a PLP administration. I'll be honest
All
with
the
you.
PLP friends, they rallying now in living rooms and pom-poms, yes.
And I see this focus on economic empowerment. I think that we have gone through the social revolution of our country in the 60s, and now we need an economic one. And we have to focus on ensuring that we're not just passing people through the school system, and persons are moving from grade level to grade level and their ability isn't being altered. We have to ensure that opportunities for Bahamians are real opportunities, and we don't just have these policies that sound good, but when you look at the numbers, it's not reflective of any kind of advantage. For instance, the housing policy and the access to these $30,000 lots. That sounds really good. 60 applicants though, 9 qualify. It's not working. And so we have to get out of our own heads about just creating things that sound good and are so appealing and tantalizing to the sense in terms of the way it is projected, and get back to realizable numbers. How efficient, how effective has this been? And that needs to be qualified by how Bahamians' lives, the lives of ordinary people in our country, have been positively impacted. If that's not your measuring, if that's not your barometer, scrap it. It's not working. Let's move on. Because it doesn't make sense to have a whole laundry list of all the things that we've done, and poverty in our country is increasing. The index of persons that are in crisis is increasing. The misery index is increasing. The numbers don't add up.
Interesting. Margaret, thank you so very much for coming.
Thank you.
I just want to say, you know, that we did offer, we did extend an invitation to some other guests. They weren't able to make it, but I'm so happy that you were able to make it.
I'm
we
glad
had
I was here
a great
too.
discussion,
Thank
and you will
you so
definitely
much.
come back. See, you were concerned
Anytime,
about whether you'd be able to hold the show,
No,
and you did a fantastic
I
job.
wanted to look to my right, and, you know, because I see people rowing on shows, man.
But sometimes I get tired of that, man. You know, I'm a referee all the time, so
I'm just kidding.
I appreciate
Yeah, no.
sometimes when I can have really great conversations, and we appreciate it. You know, nobody, you know, and I firmly believe this, that, you know, there is no monopoly on great ideas.
Yeah.
That we are as Bahamians, we all have something to say. We all have an opportunity. We all have a right to. We should all be heard. And the more ideas there are sometimes, the better off we are, and the closer we are to finding solutions to some of the things that continue to plague us.
I'll tell you the truth. There are some Bahamians that are so hungry.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just at the starting line saying, let me go. Just give me a chance. Just, I'm not even asking for a handout. Look at Bahamas Striping.
Yeah,
Look at what $5,000 did. Now
how
that's
far
a
that's it.
multi-million-dollar company, and they're not unique.
Those of us who are in our 40s, you know, we on the other end of life. So we're, you know, it's now you're looking at a generation that's coming behind and eager to ensure that they're able to take the mantle and take the reins and carry the country forward. You know, the men and women who brought us to majority rule and independence have moved off the scene and are moving off the scene.
Don't be afraid to pass the baton.
Yes, and
Don't be afraid for your season to come to an end. Don't be afraid to release your legacy to the next generation.
For sure.
Don't be afraid to let them stand upon the foundation that you've built and move on to great things.
One day I could be sitting home and let somebody else be doing on the record.
But it's a compliment to you, though.
Yes,
it's a compliment to you that you can leave something that somebody after you won't have to start from scratch. That is your legacy.
Most definitely.
And don't be afraid to release it into the world.
Well, thank you again for coming. We've had a great opportunity.
You
took an opportunity and made a great show out of it.
Thank you.
So we hope that you've enjoyed our show tonight. Very special thanks to my guest here, Robin Lyons. Also, my producer and technical staff. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.